Hey guys, tonight we're stepping into a world where the clink of chainmail echoes down muddy lanes, where the smell of wood smoke lingers in the air, and where, if you're unlucky enough, you might find yourself standing in a damp training yard, holding a wooden spear much heavier than you expected. We're going back to the Middle Ages, a place where your age wasn't just a number. It was a question of whether you'd be sent to herd sheep, carry water, or pick up a weapon and walk into the chaos of battle. Spoiler, you probably won't survive this. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're at it, drop your location and your local time in the comments. I'm always curious where and when you're listening from. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The moon is low tonight, a pale coin slipping behind tattered clouds, and your boots squelch in the wet grass. Somewhere beyond the barn you can hear the dull clatter of wooden practice swords meeting each other, a rhythm that seems almost hypnotic if you let your mind drift. This is the training yard of a small castle in the mid-14th century. You're here because in this time people are starting to look at you and measure your worth, not in years, but in muscle and stamina. You're not alone. A few other young lads shuffle in beside you, their breath steaming in the cool night air. In medieval Europe, there wasn't a single universal legal age for fighting. Instead, it varied from place to place, lord to lord. But there was one general understanding. If you were strong enough to carry the weight of armor, or at least a spear, and you could march for miles, you were a potential soldier. For noble boys, training began alarmingly early. Sometimes at just 7 years old, you'd be sent away from home to serve as a page in another lord's household. 7. At that age today, you'd still be figuring out multiplication tables, not learning how to clean and oil a sword. But here, as a page, you'd be learning courtesy and discipline, running errands for the knight you served, carrying messages, taking care of the horses, and observing everything about the life of a warrior. At first, you wouldn't be fighting. You'd be watching fetching, and sometimes trying to mimic. Slowly, you'd build the habits that might keep you alive later. How to maintain your armor, how to keep your weapon within reach, how to read the subtle signs of trouble. As you grow older, around 13 or 14, you might be promoted to squire. Now you're not just watching from the sidelines. You're sparring every day with blunted swords, carrying your knight's shield into tournaments, and maybe even riding into real battles in a supporting role. This is when you start to feel the weight of your future pressing down on you. A squire's training is relentless, endless drills, horsemanship, weapon practice, and the all-important ability to stand your ground when an opponent comes thundering toward you on horseback. You're still technically too young for the front line, but rules are soft when a war needs bodies. The common folk's path into fighting was different. If you were a peasant, your family likely worked the fields. But when your lord called for soldiers, which he could at any time, you might be expected to show up pitchfork in hand. Here, the lower limit was often looser. If you were big enough to swing a weapon and keep up on a march, you were old enough. Many teenage boys, some barely into puberty, ended up in levy forces, standing shoulder to shoulder with men twice their age. And because no one in your village could spare a fully grown laborer without hurting the harvest, sometimes the younger and more expendable bodies went first. Imagine that you're 15. Your hands are calloused from farm work. Your back aches from carrying sacks of grain, and now someone hands you a spear. It's not new. The shaft is smooth from years of use, and the point has been blunted and resharpened more times than you can count. You've had no real training, just a vague idea of how to keep the sharp end pointed at the enemy. You're marching off behind your village's men, your heart pounding, wondering if this is the day you'll see someone die or die yourself. For most of medieval history, life expectancy was short. Not necessarily because people all dropped dead at 30, but because disease, malnutrition, and injury claimed so many young lives. So adulthood came early. By the time you were in your mid-teens, society considered you capable of adult responsibilities and adult risks. It wasn't unusual to marry at that age to take over your family's work, or to be expected to defend your home. But make no mistake, fighting wasn't romantic. Even the knights with their shining armor and noble codes faced grim, grinding realities. That beautiful armor. It was heavy, hot, and suffocating. You'd sweat until your underclothes were soaked, your shoulders burning from the weight. Your helmet narrowed your vision so you could barely see to the sides. And the noise, the clash of metal, the screams, the roar of hooves was overwhelming. For a boy barely into manhood, it was a test of willpower as much as strength. Training for war wasn't just about weapons. You had to harden your body. Pages and squires were made to run long distances, carry heavy loads, practice wrestling and grappling so they could fight, even if knocked to the ground. Swordplay came later after your muscles could handle the repeated strain. You'd also be drilled in shield defense, not as glamorous as swinging a sword, but far more likely to save your life when arrows began to fall. Your first exposure to real combat might come in the form of a skirmish, a border raid perhaps, or a defense against bandits. These weren't set-piece battles with banners flying. They were messy, fast, and chaotic. You'd hear the thud of boots in mud, the dull crunch of blows landing the ragged shouts of your companions. Maybe you'd freeze. Maybe you'd lash out wildly. Either way, the moment would mark you. If you survived, you'd carry the memory in your muscles, the way fear sharpens your senses, the way your body moves almost without thought when danger rushes at you. And then there were the tournaments. Officially, these were for sport, a way for knights to train and show off. But for a young squire, they were the closest you'd come to battle without risking your life outright. You'd be sent in for mock fights, learning to take blows, to judge distance, to keep your guard up even when your arms felt like lead. The cheering crowds made it all seem glorious, but you knew in your heart that real war was waiting patient and merciless just beyond the edge of the lists. Here in the training yard tonight, you shift your grip on your practice spear. The wood is smooth and warm from your hands. Around you, the other boys exchange nervous glances. Somewhere beyond the yard, a night watchman coughs and stamps his feet to keep warm. You know deep down that you're being measured, not in years, but in readiness. And in this age, readiness might be called upon sooner than you'd ever want. The moon dips lower and the chill deepens, seeping into your boots until your toes are numb. The master-at-arms, a broad-shouldered man with a scar splitting his left eyebrow, begins to pace. He doesn't call you by name, you're simply boy to him, as all new trainees are. He doesn't care how many winters you've seen. He's watching the way you stand, the way you hold your weapon, the quickness of your reactions. In this place, ability is the true calendar, and hesitation is a kind of age. In itself, the older you are in fear, the younger you are in courage. He stops before you, eyes narrowed, and without warning, slaps your spear with his own. The blow jolts your arms and sends a shiver up your spine. Grip tighter, he mutters almost to himself and moves on. The lesson is clear: readiness isn't a speech or a title. It's a reflex drilled into you until it bypasses thought. As the drills continue, you notice the range of ages around you. There's a boy who can't be more than 12, wiry and quick. his oversized tunic flapping as he moves. Beside him, a tall youth of perhaps 17, his jawline dusted with the beginnings of a beard, swings his practice sword with the confidence of someone already familiar with its weight. This mix isn't unusual. In many medieval households, training pools were a blend, those just starting, those on the cusp of battle, and those already blooded, but sent back for more discipline. Your mind drifts, as it tends to when repetition dulls the moment, and you start thinking about what old enough really means here. In England, during the later Middle Ages, the assize of arms demanded that all free men aged 15 to 60 be ready to serve in defense of the realm. 15 was a clear line, but it was far from the whole story. In France, the call could come younger. In the Holy Roman Empire city, militias often had looser definitions, relying on anyone who could hold formation without collapsing. And in rural villages, almost anywhere, nobody was keeping a birth register if you looked able you were. For knights and nobles, the apprenticeship was regimented, but still accelerated. 7 as a page, 14 as a squire, 21 as a knight, that was the idealized ladder. Reality was more flexible. A noble son might be knighted early if his father needed him for a campaign, or held back if the lands were at peace and there was no urgency. And in times of crisis, like during the 100 Years' War, ceremony gave way to necessity. Squires barely into their teens could find themselves dubbed on the field simply because they'd fought bravely and there was no one else to fill the role. The clank of armor drifts across the yard, breaking your thoughts. 2 older squires are suiting up for a demonstration. You watch as they strap on breastplates and vambraces, their movements practiced and economical. The younger of the 2 hesitates over his helmet strap, fumbling, until his companion tightens it for him. You imagine how heavy that must feel, the weight pressing down on your neck, the rim cutting off your peripheral vision. It's not just physical strength you need to bear armor, it's endurance. And endurance is the hardest thing to measure at a glance. Your own training tonight shifts from spear work to shield drills. The master-at-arms barks for you to pair off, and soon you're crouched behind a rough-edged wooden shield, bracing as your partner slams into it with his shoulder. The shock rattles your teeth. Again and again he drives into you, and again you hold your ground. The point isn't to win, it's to feel the force and survive it. Later you'll learn that in many battles, the youngest fighters were kept on the flanks or in reserve. It wasn't generosity, it was strategy. A raw recruit in the center line was a risk, a gap waiting to happen. But tucked away at the edges, you could learn the rhythm of the fight without being crushed in the first charge. Some never left those flanks, growing into seasoned militia, who never once led a charge, but held their ground in skirmishes and sieges. Your thoughts wander to those who had no training yard at all. In peasant uprisings like the Jacquerie in France or the English peasants' revolt, fighters were whatever the village could muster, boys who had never sparred men who had only hunted game. There, the age question was purely pragmatic. If you could walk to the fight and swing a club, you went. In such moments, fathers and sons fought side by side, and the line between boyhood and manhood blurred in the press of bodies. The master-at-arms calls a halt. Sweat clings to your neck despite the cold. You lean on your spear, catching your breath, and notice the stars are fading slightly in the east. Morning isn't far. You think about how many mornings like this lie ahead before someone decides you're ready for more than drills. It's an unsettling thought. Readiness here isn't about whether you feel prepared. It's about whether someone else thinks you're useful. You remember overhearing a story by the fire a few nights ago. A knight recounted how during a siege a boy of just 13 had slipped into the enemy camp at night and set fire to their food stores. He'd been found and cut down before he could escape, but the attack had weakened the enemy enough for the siege to succeed. The knight told it as a tale of bravery, but the squire listening beside you had only shaken his head and muttered, "He was just a child." That was the uncomfortable truth valor and youth often mixed in ways that left no room for the years in between. Your partner nudges you. The master-at-arms has called you forward for a mock duel. You step into the ring, your heart beating a little faster, the eyes of the other trainees on you. Across from you, a boy, a year or two older, grips his practice sword. The master drops his hand. You circle, feint, and strike. Wood meets wood with a crack. He pushes you, push back. It's clumsy, but it's alive, the taste of what might one day be more than just practice. By the time the bout ends, your arms ache and your legs are trembling. The master-at-arms gives a curt nod, no praise, no criticism, just acknowledgement that you've endured another step. You're sent back to your place and training resumes as if nothing happened. That's how it always is, one small test after another, each blurring into the next, until the day comes when someone says, "You're ready." And ready or not, you'll go. The training yard begins to thin as the younger pages are sent inside their small forms, disappearing into the dim light spilling from the hall. The air smells faintly of wet hay and wood smoke, and the last of the night's frost glitters on the ground where the torches don't reach. You stay. You're old enough now to take the longer drills to bear the master-at-arms' unblinking stare until he's satisfied. That in itself is a quiet sign they're pushing you harder because they expect more. He has you and the other remaining trainees line up for footwork exercises. No weapons this time, just movement advancing, retreating, sidestepping, pivoting. It's not glamorous, but it's the foundation of everything. A clumsy fighter trips over himself. A trained fighter moves like the fight is a dance he's already memorized. Every turn, every shuffle is meant to put you in a place where you can strike or defend without losing your balance. The man next to you is 17 broad-chested, his tunic clinging with sweat. He's nearly ready for knighthood, you can tell in the way the master watches him with a more critical eye. His footwork is sharp, precise. Yours is better than it was last month, but every mistake feels enormous under that cold scrutiny. You remind yourself that in this world, your years are less important than how little you stumble. As you move, you think about the way society here measures worth. In a modern world, someone might ask your age before deciding if you can drive a car or sign a contract or vote. Here, no one cares about the number. They care about whether you can take a spear thrust without flinching, whether you can ride through mud without falling, whether you can run a mile in full gear without collapsing. These are the tests that mark you as ready. In the noble courts, the progression from page to squire to knight is still the ideal, but even there, exceptions are countless. During the Crusades, records tell of boys as young as 12 riding with armies, sometimes as squires, sometimes in more dangerous roles if they had the nerve and strength. Chroniclers wrote of them almost casually, as if the sight of a child in armor wasn't worth remarking on. War did not wait for birthdays. Among the common folk, there's an even starker reality. Many boys first see combat, not in formal military service, but in defending their village. Maybe a neighboring lord's men come raiding for cattle, or bandits sweep in to take whatever they can carry. When that happens, there's no muster roll, no declaration. You grab what you can, a pitchfork, a hatchet, a sharpened stick, and you stand in the mud with your neighbors. Some of those who survive keep on fighting as part of a local militia. Others slip back to farming, their brief moment of battle fading into memory. But all of them, for better or worse, become old enough the moment they've faced an enemy and lived. The master-at-arms halts the drill. Without a word, he leads you to a corner of the yard, where a rack of training shields leans against the wall. These are heavier than the ones you used earlier with iron rims that bite into your forearm if you're careless. He has you pair off again this time for shield-on-shield shoving matches. The point is endurance, forcing your legs to hold steady under pressure. Your opponent leans into you, driving you back step by step until you find your balance and push back. The ground under your boots shifts, frost-breaking mud sucking at your soles. You can feel your breath heating the inside of your helm, even though it's only padded leather tonight. Your arms tremble from the strain, but you manage to hold. The master grunts approval. That's all you'll get. After the exercise, you sink onto a low bench by the wall, rolling your shoulders to ease the tightness. The older squire drops down beside you. He tells you in a low voice about his first battle, how he was 15, barely ready when his lord's banner was called to ride. They'd marched for 2 days, camped in the open, and been thrown into the fray before dawn on the third morning. He'd been terrified, he admits, but there'd been no choice. He'd fought because the man beside him fought, and somehow he'd made it through. His voice carries no boast, only the quiet weight of experience. It strikes you that stories like his are everywhere here. The age of first battle is rarely a clean number. It's an accident of timing. Be unlucky enough to be 14 during a campaign year, and you might end up in the thick of it. Be fortunate enough to be the same age during a lull, and you might have 2 or 3 more years of drills before anyone hands you a sharpened blade. The master-at-arms calls for final exercises, a series of paired bouts with short wooden swords. The weapon is light compared to a real blade, but after hours of training, it feels heavier than it should. You square off against the 17-year-old again. He's faster, stronger, but you're determined to keep your guard. His strikes rain down high-low from the side, and you block, dodge, parry. A few land against your padded jacket, jolting you. You grit your teeth and keep moving. At last, the master calls a halt. You both lower your swords, breathing hard. The older boy gives you a small nod, just enough to acknowledge that you've held your own. In this place, respect doesn't come in grand gestures. It comes in the smallest of acknowledgments after shared effort. The torches in the yard gutter low as the first pale streaks of dawn creep over the walls. Training is done. You trudge toward the hall, the smell of bread and broth pulling you forward. Inside, the heat of the hearth wraps around you, and you ease onto the bench beside the others. The clatter of wooden bowls, the murmur of voices, all of it is familiar, almost comforting. As you eat, your mind wanders again. You think of boys like yourself scattered across the countryside, some training in great halls, some in small village clearings, some already in the field. The age question is meaningless now. What matters is that you've begun, and there is no turning back. Every drill, every push, every bruise is carrying you toward the moment when practice ends and the real thing begins. And when that day comes, you'll discover whether you were ever truly ready at all. The hall slowly empties as the older squires and men-at-arms rise from the benches, some heading to tend the horses, others to carry out whatever errands the steward assigns. You finish your bread, letting the crust scrape the roof of your mouth and wipe the crumbs from your hands. Outside, the morning mist still clings to the ground, curling low over the training yard, as if reluctant to leave. You step back into the cold, your muscles stiffening now that they've cooled. Today your duties are lighter. You're assigned to the gate tower to observe the sentries and learn the rhythm of the watch. It's a different kind of training, one that requires patience instead of strength. You climb the worn stone steps, your boots striking a steady beat, and emerge into the biting wind at the top. From here, you can see the frost-silvered fields stretching away the bare branches of winter trees, the faint plume of smoke from a far-off village. The older sentry, standing beside you, leans on his spear, squinting into the pale light. He tells you that when he was your age, 14, he'd already been on campaign twice. Once to chase off raiders, once to serve in a siege. They said I was ready, he shrugs, as though the choice had never been his. He glances at you, the corner of his mouth twitching. You'll hear it soon enough. His words settle over you like the cold. You turn your gaze outward again, tracing the faint line of the road where it vanishes into the trees. Somewhere out there, men are moving merchants, pilgrims, messengers, and perhaps if the times turn hard, soldiers. The watch teaches you to read the land, to spot movement far away, to judge distance and speed. These are skills as vital as swordplay, for in battle, seeing the enemy before they see you can be the difference between life and death. In truth, much of medieval soldiering isn't the clash of steel at all. It's the long, dull stretches of waiting. Guarding a road, manning a wall, patrolling a border. Hours spent watching clouds pass and shadows shift, knowing that in an instant the stillness could shatter. For the youngest fighters, this waiting can be as hard as the fighting itself. The mind drifts, grows restless, and in that restlessness lies danger. From your perch, you think again about the pathways into battle. In villages, the call to arms can come without warning. A horn in the night, a pounding at the door. You might be roused from sleep and told to grab whatever weapon you have. No one stops to ask your age in that moment. If you can run, you run. If you can hold a spear, you hold it. And when the threat passes, whether you've fought or only stood, watch. You've stepped into the role of defender, and it marks you. For noble sons, there's a ritual to the readiness. Before a squire is sent into real combat, there's often a ceremonial blessing, a vigil in the chapel, a prayer for protection, the laying on of a sword. But when war presses hard, even these rituals are hurried or skipped. The blessing becomes a muttered phrase before the charge, the vigil a few hours of restless sleep on the ground. It's a sobering reminder that chivalry bends easily under the weight of necessity. The sentry shifts beside you, stamping his feet against the cold. He points toward the far tree line where two riders are making their slow way along the road. They're too far to make out clearly, but their posture suggests caution. You watch them for several minutes until they vanish around a bend. Just travelers, perhaps, or perhaps scouts for something larger. It's the uncertainty that wears on you. Later, when you climb down from the tower, the master-at-arms intercepts you. He has a task: you're to accompany a small hunting party into the woods. Not for sport, but for training, learning to move silently, to keep formation, to watch your footing. You take a spear and follow the group through the gate, the cold air cutting into your lungs. The forest closes around you, the sounds of the castle fading, until all you hear is the crunch of leaves and the occasional snap of a twig. The leader signals a halt. You crouch, peering ahead. A small group of deer grazes in a clearing, their ears twitching. You're not here to kill them today, only to see how close you can get without startling them. Step by step, you advance, your heart pounding. One wrong move, one careless sound, and they'll bolt. This is the lesson in war: stealth can be as deadly as force. The deer lift their heads, sniffing the air. For a long moment, no one moves. Then a shift in the wind carries your scent to them, and they're gone in a flash of white tails. The leader nods. You've learned enough for now. The party turns back toward the castle, moving quickly through the undergrowth. Back within the walls, you return your spear to the rack and strip off your damp gloves. Your fingers are stiff, your cheeks raw from the wind. But you carry a small spark of satisfaction, another skill added to the growing list. You're learning that fighting isn't just about meeting the enemy head-on. It's about preparation, awareness, the ability to read a moment and act before it turns against you. That night by the fire, you hear another tale. This one is about a boy not much older than you, who served as a messenger during a siege. He slipped through enemy lines under cover of darkness, carrying vital orders to an allied force. He never came back, but his message arrived and the castle was saved. The storyteller doesn't dwell on the boy's fate. Instead, he praises the courage it took to ride out into the unknown. Around the hearth heads nod. Here such courage is the measure of age as much as any birthday. As you curl up in your narrow bed, the echoes of the day follow you. The watchtower's wind, the stillness of the deer, the quiet nod of respect from the hunting leader. Each moment feels small on its own, but together they're shaping you into someone who will one day stand in the line not as a boy, but as a fighter. And you understand perhaps for the first time that the transformation isn't marked by a number. It's marked by the day no one doubts you belong there. The mornings begin to blur together after that. Cold air in your lungs, the scrape of boots on stone, the smell of smoke clinging to everything you own. Your body begins to remember the rhythms before your mind does, the way you roll your shoulders before lifting a shield, the angle your feet find in the yard without needing to look down. The master at arms still corrects you, still snaps at mistakes, but less often now. It's not kindness. It's simply that you're starting to meet the standard he demands. One morning, the drills change. Instead of the usual sparring and shield work, you're given a bow and sent to the butts at the far end of the yard. The targets are little more than straw-stuffed sacks on wooden frames, but to hit them at any real distance requires more than luck. Your first few arrows wobble and drop short. The master archer watches without expression, then steps forward and adjusts your stance, feet wider, back straighter. You draw again, the bowstring creaking, and this time the arrow finds the outer ring. In some parts of medieval Europe, archery was considered as important as swordplay, especially for common soldiers. In England, for example, longbow practice was compulsory for men and boys from the age of around 15, sometimes even younger. Parish records show fines for skipping practice because a well-trained archer could be decisive in battle. At Crécy and Agincourt, armies of English archers, many of them barely out of boyhood, cut down waves of heavily armored knights from a distance. You keep shooting until your fingers ache and your shoulders burn. The bow feels awkward in your hands compared to a sword, but there's a strange satisfaction in seeing an arrow bury itself deep in the target. This too is part of readiness, the ability to strike before your enemy even closes the distance. And for younger fighters, it's often safer than meeting steel with steel. After the archery session, you're sent with a work crew to help repair the palisade outside the lower gate. The timbers are heavy, and the cold makes them harder to grip. You wedge them into place while an older man hammers iron nails through. This too is training, not glamorous, but vital. A wall that holds can keep a fight from reaching you at all. You begin to see how every skill, every task, threads into the larger web of survival. That evening in the hall, talk turns to the coming season. There are rumors of unrest in a neighboring lord's lands, disputes over borders, over taxes. Nothing official yet, but the garrison here is quietly preparing. Supplies are being counted, weapons checked, horses conditioned. The veterans speak in low voices about if and when. No one says it out loud, but you know that if trouble comes, age will matter even less than usual. Later you find yourself beside the same 17-year-old squire who bested you in sparring. He's oiling his sword, the metal catching the firelight. You ask him how old he was when he first fought for real. He thinks for a moment, then says 16, but it might as well have been 10. I didn't feel ready. He glances at you as if to see if you understand. You do. Readiness here isn't a feeling you reach. It's a point you're pushed to. The next day, you're back on the watchtower. The wind is fierce, snapping at your cloak, carrying the smell of wood smoke from the villages beyond. The sentry beside you points out movement on the road, a small caravan ox carts laden with goods guarded by men carrying spears. They pass without trouble, but the sight lingers with you. In times of peace, those guards might be older men, veterans of past campaigns. In times of war, they might be your age. From the tower, you can also see the training yard below. The younger pages are drilling with wooden swords, their movements jerky and uneven. You remember being there not long ago, the sting of a misjudged parry on your forearm, the frustration of feeling clumsy. It's strange to realize how far you've come already and how far you still have to go. In the weeks that follow, the training grows more demanding. You run longer distances in full gear practice, fighting in close formation. Learn to read hand signals from a commander in the noise of a drill. You're paired with different partners, some stronger, some quicker, each teaching you something new. The bruises fade slower now, but you feel a grim pride in them. They're proof that you're being shaped into what you'll need to be. One afternoon, you're sent with a patrol to scout the river crossing a mile from the castle. The water is high from recent rains, the current swift and dangerous. You're told to watch for signs of tampering, cut ropes on the ferry, weakened supports on the footbridge. It's tedious work, cold and wet, but it teaches you another truth. An enemy doesn't have to meet you on the field to hurt you. Sabotage, starvation. Fear, these are weapons too, and defending against them is as much a soldier's work as wielding a sword. That night, you dream of standing on that bridge watching dark shapes move in the water. In the dream, you're frozen, unable to call out, and the shapes keep coming. You wake in the dark heart pounding the distant sound of the night watch's footsteps fading down the hall. It takes a long time for sleep to return. In the morning, the master-at-arms doesn't comment on the shadows under your eyes. He only hands you a shield and says, again, and you do. Because here, every day is another step toward the same place, the line where you'll stand no longer a boy in training, but a soldier among soldiers. And when you reach it, no one will care how many birthdays you've had. The weeks slide by in a steady rhythm of drills, duties, and watch shifts. And the first signs of spring creep into the air. The frost on the yard melts faster now in the mornings, and the fields beyond the walls begin to show faint green. The veterans say this is the season when campaigning often begins. The roads firm up the rivers, calm, and armies can move without sinking knee-deep in mud. For you, it means the training takes on a sharper edge. One morning, instead of the usual spear drills, the master-at-arms announces that you'll be practicing mock formations. You and the other squires are handed long poles in place of spears, and the older men bark commands, advance, brace wheel, left close ranks. At first, it's chaos. Feet tangle poles, clash, gaps open in the line. The master shouts, voice cutting across the yard. Tighten up. You're not a flock of geese, you're a wall. Bit by bit, the movement becomes smoother. You learn to keep your place by the corner of your eye, matching your stride to the man beside you, adjusting your pole so it stays level with the others. In battle, this cohesion matters more than individual skill. A tight formation can hold against a stronger enemy, while a loose one will crumble at the first push. And the younger you are, the harder it is to resist the instinct to break away when fear surges. This is why they drill you until your body obeys without asking your mind. During a break, the 17-year-old squire tells you about a levy force he once trained alongside. Half of them were village lads, some as young as 13. They were eager but undisciplined in the press of a fight. They scattered like startled birds. Most didn't last the first charge. He says it without cruelty, just as a fact. The lesson is clear: bravery without discipline is a fast road to the grave. The next exercise is even more grueling: shield wall practice. You lock shields with the men on either side standing so close you can smell their sweat and hear their breath. Then the master sends another line of squires to slam into you again and again. The force drives you back an inch at a time, your arms straining, your knees buckling. You grit your teeth and push forward, feeling the weight of the man behind you bracing against your back. The world narrows to the wooden rim of your shield, the pounding of your heart, the grunts of effort on either side. When the master finally calls a halt, your forearms are numb, your shoulders screaming. But you're still standing, and the line hasn't broken. That he tells you is the point. You don't have to win every clash. You have to hold. In the afternoons, the training shifts to mounted work. You're not yet trusted with a full set of armor on horseback, but you ride with a padded jacket and helm, learning to guide your mount with your knees while keeping your weapon steady. It's harder than it looks. The horse moves beneath you like a living tide, and your balance must adjust with every step. You practice couching your lance under your arm, aiming it at a straw target as the horse gallops past. The first time you miss completely. The second time, the lance skims the edge. By the fifth try, you strike near the center, the jolt running up your arm. Mounted combat is the mark of the knightly class, but it's also a skill that takes years to master. Some boys spend half their youth in the saddle learning to trust their horse as much as their weapon. You think of the pages who start at 7, their small hands clutching reins, their feet nowhere near the stirrups. By the time they're your age, riding feels as natural as walking. You're not there yet, but each session brings you closer. One evening, you're sent with a patrol to the edge of the forest to check the hunting traps. It's quiet work, but the captain uses it as a lesson in awareness. He points out the bent grass where someone passed recently, the faint smell of wood smoke on the wind, the way the birds fall silent when something moves nearby. You learn to notice, he says, or you learn to die. For a young fighter, this kind of skill can mean survival before the sword is ever drawn. That night, you're bone-tired. You eat slowly, your arms heavy, your eyelids heavier. Across the hall, the veterans are telling stories again. One speaks of a campaign in the borderlands where a boy no older than 15 was placed on watch and spotted enemy movement hours before they attacked. That warning saved the camp. Another tells of a lad of the same age who froze on watch, letting a raiding party slip through. The cost was heavy. The line between those two fates is razor thin. As the fire burns low, you think about how much of this life depends on being ready before you feel ready. The age question doesn't seem to have a clear answer, because it isn't really about years. It's about whether you can be trusted with the lives of the men beside you. That's a harder measure, and it can't be faked for long. The next morning, the master-at-arms gathers the trainees and tells you there will be a mock skirmish in the lower meadow. You're split into 2 groups, each given a colored strip of cloth to mark your seta. The rules are simple: capture the other team's banner without losing your own. It sounds almost like a game until the first clash. The air is filled with shouts, the thud of boots on grass, the smack of wood on wood. You dart forward, shield high, only to be shoved back by a bigger opponent. You feint left, slip right, and find yourself face to face with a boy your own age. For a moment you both hesitate, then the training takes over. He lunges, you block, and the exchange is on. It's messy, breathless, exhilarating. In the end, your side loses. The master says nothing about victory or defeat. He only notes who held their ground, who kept their head when pressed, who broke formation. You don't know which category you've landed in, but you do know this: you want another chance. Because every bout, every drill, every ride through the mud is one more step toward that line where the youngest fighters stand beside the oldest, and no one asks the question anymore. The meadow is quiet again the next morning, dew soaking into the grass, where the mock battle churned the earth just a day before. The banners have been taken down, the footprints fading in the sun, but you can still feel the hum of the fight in your legs. There's a strange satisfaction in knowing you've stood your ground even in defeat. The veterans say losing teaches you more than winning ever could, so long as you listen to the lesson. The Master at Arms has a different challenge today. You're to learn about siege defense. The word siege carries its own weight here. It's not the quick clash of a field battle. It's slow strangulation. The defenders hunker behind walls while the attackers cut them off from supplies. Days stretch into weeks, weeks into months. Hunger gnaws at your belly. Disease creeps through the cramped quarters, tempers fray. And all the while, the enemy's machines pound at your walls. You're assigned to the wall walk, patrolling between two towers. The sun glints off the frozen moat, below a thin crust of ice, breaking where the current runs strongest. The captain explains the routines: how to keep the watch staggered, how to signal between towers, how to store arrows and stones within easy reach. He shows you the murder holes over the gate, the spots where boiling water or heated sand could be poured down onto attackers. It feels almost clinical, like a lesson in craft rather than war. But then you remember this isn't theory, it's survival. In history, some of the youngest defenders in sieges were barely into their teens. Chronicles tell of boys hauling water to the walls, carrying messages between towers, even manning small crossbows when the grown men were needed elsewhere. In a long siege, every able body was put to work. Age was irrelevant when the choice was work or watch the walls fall. The captain has you practice loading a small ballista, the torsion arms groaning as you crank them back. It's heavier than you expect, the effort making your arms shake. You slot the bolt in place, aim at a wooden target propped in the meadow, and release. The bolt slams home with a satisfying thud. The weapon feels like a living thing under your hands, and you can imagine the terror it would send into anyone climbing a ladder toward your wall. After an hour, you're rotated to stone-hauling duty. Buckets of fist-sized rocks are stacked at intervals along the parapet. These are for dropping on attackers, crude but effective. You haul until your shoulders ache, your breath puffing white in the cold air. At one point, you pause to stretch your back and glance down into the empty moat. In your mind's eye, you see it filled with armored men, ladders scraping against the wall, the sky thick with arrows. You can almost hear the clang of steel on steel, the shouts of men trying to force their way inside. That image stays with you through the day. By evening, when you gather in the hall for supper, you're quieter than usual. Across the table, one of the older men catches your eye and gives a small, knowing nod. You suspect he remembers the first time he imagined a siege in full fury, too. The next day brings another kind of lesson: foraging. You're sent beyond the walls with a small group to search for early greens, herbs, and firewood. This might seem like a simple chore, but it's also part of a soldier's life. Armies on the move live off the land when supplies run short. Knowing where to find edible plants, how to set small snares, and how to carry enough back without slowing the march is as valuable as knowing how to wield a sword. The captain leading you explains that during a siege, foraging parties are sometimes sent out under cover of night to slip past the enemy lines and gather food. These missions are dangerous. If caught, you're cut off from the safety of the walls. More than one young fighter has disappeared this way. The thought sends a shiver through you, but you keep your eyes open, noting where herbs cluster in the damp ground, where fallen branches lie dry under the shelter of pines. When you return, the master-at-arms is waiting. He inspects your haul, offers a curt nod, and sends you to clean and store it. No praise, but no reprimand either, which is you've learned the closest thing to approval you're likely to get. That evening, the talk by the fire turns again to real battles. One man speaks of a siege where a boy of 14 earned a place in the garrison by spotting a breach in the enemy's lines and alerting the commander. Another tells of a lad the same age who slipped out through a sally port to cut the ropes on enemy siege towers. He made it back with an arrow in his leg and a grin on his face. Stories like these blur the lines between page, squire, soldier. Courage has no set age, and the castle walls don't care how many birthdays you've celebrated. The following morning, the drills shift to night work. You're taken onto the wall after dark, the torches burning low, the air damp and cold. The captain teaches you how to move silently in armor, how to keep to the shadows so your silhouette doesn't betray your position, how to listen for sounds below that don't belong, the faint scrape of a ladder, the creak of leather, the murmur of voices carried on the wind. Night is a different world for a defender. Your eyes strain against the dark. Your ears reach for every small sound. Fear feels sharper here, closer to the skin. By the time you're dismissed, your nerves are taut, your senses still humming. You slip into your bed without speaking, the quiet of the barracks settling over you like a heavy blanket. It takes a long time for your mind to drift away from the black shape of the walls against the darker sky. You understand now more than ever that fighting in this world isn't always about the charge, the clash, the glorious moment. Sometimes it's about standing still in the dark, ears open heart, steady, waiting for something you hope will never come. And when you can do that without breaking, that's when they start to think you're ready. The dark still clings to you the next morning, even as daylight filters through the narrow windows of the hall. It's strange how the mind holds on to the night, the weight of the silence, the shapes that might have been shadows, or might have been something else. You eat your bread and broth quietly, watching the steam curl upward until it disappears. Around you, the older squires speak in low tones about the night watches they've endured in real sieges, the moments when the world outside the walls seemed to hold its breath before chaos came rushing in. Today's training is different. The master-at-arms announces that you'll be learning how to fight, but in tight spaces, the kind of fighting that happens in narrow alleys on winding staircases, or between the bodies pressed together in a crush. He leads you to a wooden structure built in the yard, a mock-up of a section of wall with a steep stair and a cramped platform at the top. The space barely allows two people to stand side by side, and the master's voice is sharp as he warns you. Here every movement matters. There's no room to swing wide. Your strikes must be short, precise. Waste a breath and you're done. You take turns climbing the stair shield up, weapon ready, facing an opponent already waiting at the top. The fights are quick and brutal. You learn to keep your shield tight to your body, to thrust rather than slash, to use your weight to push the other fighter back instead of chasing him down. On the narrow stair, a stumble could be as deadly as a sword thrust. You lose your first bout, your balance faltering under a hard shove. By the second, you've learned to brace your back foot to absorb the hit and hold your ground. The master reminds you that this is the kind of fighting defenders face when the enemy breaches the walls. Once they're inside, there's no gallant duel, no open space to maneuver. It's a brawl for every inch of ground fought in shadows and choke points. And the younger the fighter, the harder it is to keep composure when pressed chest to chest with the enemy. That's why they drill you now, so that when the crush comes, your body knows what to do, even if your mind screams to flee. After hours of close quarters work, you switch to another exercise defending a narrow doorway. Here, one fighter stands in the frame while 2 or 3 attempt to push through. It's exhausting work. Every block, every shove saps your strength. But you begin to see the advantage a smaller defender can have in such a space. Your size, which might be a disadvantage in the open field, allows you to hold low, keep compact, and make the most of the narrow gap. Later, during a pause, one of the older men leans against the wall beside you. He tells you about a siege he fought in when he was barely 16, how he and 2 others held a gatehouse stair for hours against wave after wave of attackers. They didn't have time to think about their age or their fear. You fight because the man beside you fights, he says simply. And when he falls, you fight harder. The afternoon brings a change of pace. You're sent to work with the castle's smith, learning how to maintain weapons and armor. The forge is hot, the air thick with the smell of metal and charcoal. You pump the bellows, watching the coals flare bright, then observe as the smith hammers dents from a breastplate. He explains that a soldier's life depends as much on well-kept gear as on skill. A loose strap, a dulled edge, a weakened link in the mail, these are weaknesses the enemy can exploit. He lets you try your hand at sharpening a sword. The rhythm is soothing, draw, lift, the rasp of stone against steel. You can imagine how many times in the field a fighter might do this by firelight, preparing for whatever came with the dawn. Even this, you realize, is part of readiness. By evening, the master-at-arms gathers everyone for a short march beyond the walls. You move in formation along the road, the rhythm of boots and the creak of leather settling into your bones. The march isn't long, just enough to remind you what it feels like to move as one unit, to keep pace without thought, to let the man ahead set the speed while you keep your eyes scanning the horizon. You carry your weapon at the ready, the road stretching ahead like a narrow promise. When you return, the sun is dipping low, turning the sky the color of banked embers. The veterans peel off toward the stables or the hall, their conversation easy. You linger in the yard for a moment, watching the shadows stretch long. You think about the day's lessons, the stair, the doorway, the press of bodies, the hiss of the whetstone. None of it is glorious, but all of it feels like another step toward that undefined line where youth ends and soldiering begins. That night, you're too tired to stay by the fire. You fall into bed, the sounds of the barracks fading into the steady rhythm of breath and shifting blankets. Sleep comes quickly, but your dreams are thick with the smell of hot iron, the clang of swords, the narrow dark of stairwells. Somewhere in the dream, you're climbing again, shield raised, heart pounding, and the enemy is waiting at the top. You wake before dawn, the memory lingering, the lesson sharper than any blade in this world. There is no gentle passage from boy to man. There is only the moment when the fight finds you, and you stand or you fall. The sky is pale and brittle the next morning, streaked with thin clouds that promise rain later in the day. The yard smells faintly of wet wood and the sour tang of yesterday's forge smoke. You're summoned early before you've even finished your bread to the stables. The master-at-arms is waiting there with a different sort of lesson reconnaissance. You're paired with two older squires and given instructions to ride out beyond the nearest village to a ridge that overlooks a stretch of open ground. Your task is simple: in theory, observe, remember, report. But the master warns you that in real war, reconnaissance can be the most dangerous work. Scouts ride light and often alone, slipping ahead of the army to find the enemy or stumbling into them. The horses are restless in the cool air, their breath misting in pale clouds. You mount awkwardly, but manage to settle in the saddle before the group moves out. The road out of the castle winds between winter-bare hedgerows, the hooves drumming a steady rhythm on the packed earth. You pass farmers mending fences, women carrying baskets of firewood, children who pause in their play to stare as you ride by. Out here, you're not training in the safety of the yard. You're moving through the same world where war unfolds. At the ridge, you dismount and lead your horse up the last few steps. The view is wide, rolling fields, a scatter of cottages, the silver thread of a river curling toward the horizon. One of the older squires points out signs you might have missed: the smoke from a chimney too far from any visible building, the faint glimmer of something metallic in the tree line, the way the sheep in one pasture cluster toward the far end as if avoiding something. You note each detail carefully. The older squire tells you that in real campaigns, such signs could mean anything, from a wandering merchant to an advancing enemy force. A good scout learns to see patterns others overlook, and to return with that knowledge alive. Too many young riders never make it back, their information lost with them. The ride back is quicker, the wind sharp against your cheeks. Back at the castle, you give your report to the master-at-arms. He listens without expression, then asks pointed questions. How many plumes of smoke? How far from the river? Which direction were the sheep facing? You answer as best you can, realizing how much sharper your attention will need to be next time. This is another kind of readiness, one measured in memory, not muscle. In the afternoon, the training shifts again. You're sent to the yard for weapon switch drills, learning to change from one weapon to another quickly. First spear to sword, then sword to bow. It's clumsy at first. You fumble with the straps on the bow case, drop your shield while reaching for the spear. But the master drives you harder, barking faster. An enemy won't wait while you untangle yourself. By the end of the hour, your movements are still far from perfect, but they're quicker, smoother. Afterward, you're paired with a younger page for a teaching exercise. You show him how to grip a practice spear, how to brace for a shove. It's strange to stand in the role of instructor, even briefly. You catch yourself repeating phrases the master-at-arms has drilled into you, hearing his voice in your own. You wonder if this is how the older squires feel when they correct you, a chain of lessons stretching backward and forward through time. That evening, the barracks hums with talk. A small troop of messengers has arrived, bringing news from the Lord's allies. The words are guarded, but you gather that the unrest beyond the border is worsening. The older squires trade glances. They know what this means. If trouble spills over, every able hand will be called, and that will include you. One of the veterans, a broad-shouldered man with a scar across his jaw, joins your table. Between bites of bread, he tells you about the first time he rode as a scout in wartime. He'd been 17, but he insists age made no difference. It's not the years, he says. It's whether you can see what's in front of you and what's coming behind. He leans in slightly, his voice dropping. and whether you can ride away from it fast enough when it's bigger than you. The next day's work is less glamorous, repairing the fletching on a bundle of arrows. You sit in the hall with a small group, stripping damaged feathers and binding on new ones with thin cord. It's fiddly, patient work, and your fingers cramp before long. But by the time you're done, you have a neat row of arrows ready for use. You think about how in a real fight, every arrow could matter. One well-placed shot might drop an enemy commander, end a charge, save a friend. You might not know which arrow it is when you loose it, but you still make each one as if it could be the one. That night, the weather shifts. Rain patters against the shutters, the wind moans in the chimneys. You lie awake, listening the damp creeping into your bones despite the blanket. In the darkness, you imagine the ridge again, the scattered signs, the sheep turning away, the glint in the trees. You think about how in the life you're stepping into, every detail could be the start of a story you don't want to live through. The Master-at-Arms would say that readiness isn't just about standing firm in battle. It's about carrying the weight of watchfulness day after day until it's as natural as breathing. And in that, you realize you're still learning. The rain lingers into the morning, turning the yard into a patchwork of slick mud and puddles. The sky hangs low and gray, the kind of day when you'd rather linger by the hearth than trudge out into the cold. But there's no shelter from training here. Wet weather is as much a part of soldiering as sunshine. The Master-at-Arms decides that if the yard is a swamp, then today is the perfect day for endurance work. You and the other squires are marched out into the fields beyond the walls, packs strapped to your backs, each carrying a length of timber across your shoulders. The mud sucks at your boots, the rain trickles cold down the back of your neck. At first you keep count of your steps, but after a while the rhythm of trudging blurs into something thoughtless. You glance at the others, teeth-gritted cloaks plastered to their shoulders, heads bowed against the rain. When you finally stop, it's in a clearing bordered by dripping trees. The master has you practice setting up a temporary barricade using the timbers and whatever brush is at hand. You work quickly, fingers stiff from the cold, wedging the logs into place and packing them with wet earth. In real fighting, such makeshift defenses can buy precious minutes that might save lives. And the youngest fighters often find themselves on such tasks, keeping busy at the edge of battle while the veterans face the main force. Once the barricade is built, you're ordered to defend it in a mock assault. The opposing group charges through the mud, splashing water up your legs. You brace behind the barrier, shoving back with poles and shields. The footing is treacherous. More than once, you nearly lose your balance. But you keep your place, pushing until the attackers finally break off. You're panting, soaked to the bone, but the barrier still stands. The master gives a short nod before ordering you to dismantle it and carry the timbers back. By the time you reach the castle, the rain has eased to a mist. You're exhausted, but the work isn't over. The armorer needs help drying and oiling the training weapons so they don't warp in the damp. You rub the blades with cloth, the metal catching faint glimmers of light from the torches. It's tedious work, but you understand its worth. A weapon left to rust is a weapon that might fail when you need it most. The afternoon brings an unexpected change. You're summoned to the great hall where the Lord himself stands speaking with the captain of the guard. The air is tense. You catch fragments of conversation, patrols, sightings, unrest in the borderlands. The captain glances at you and the other squires before giving a small, unreadable nod. You're dismissed without explanation, but you know what it means. The rumors are edging closer to reality. Later, as you sit by the fire, one of the older squires tells you about his first march toward battle. He'd been 16, barely past the stage you're at now. It wasn't the fighting that was hardest, he says, staring into the flames. It was the waiting. Every mile you're wondering if you'll see the enemy crest the next hill. And when you do, you wonder if you'll still be breathing after the sun goes down. His voice is calm, but you can hear the memory weighing in it. The next day's drills are sharper, more urgent. Formation work is tighter, weapon changes faster, shield wall holds longer. You run the same exercises you've done 100 times, but there's a different energy in the yard. Now an undercurrent that says you're no longer practicing just for practice. You're practicing because you might need these movements for real and soon. In the evening, you're assigned to a long watch shift on the wall. The air is cold but clear, the stars sharp above you. You walk the length between towers again and again, the rhythm of your boots on the stone a steady companion. Every sound catches your attention, the creak of the gate, the rustle of the wind through bare branches, the distant bark of a dog from the village below. You know most nights will pass like this, quiet and uneventful. But all it takes is one night, one change for everything to tilt. Near the end of your watch, the captain joins you. He leans on the parapet, scanning the dark fields. When it comes, he says softly, "Don't think about whether you're ready. Just do the thing in front of you, ready or not." That's all there is. You nod the words, settling into your mind like a weight and a promise at once. When you're relieved at dawn, your legs are stiff, your eyes gritty. But you walk back to the barracks with a strange sense of calm. The training, the rain, the mud, the nights on the wall, it's all building towards something you can't quite see yet. And you know that when the day comes, no one will measure your worth by the candles on a birthday cake. They'll measure it by whether you stand your ground when the line is drawn. The days grow longer, the mornings brighter, but the sense of tightening in the air doesn't fade. Every conversation among the older squires seems to circle back to the same point, the possibility of being called beyond the walls. You're not meant to overhear, but voices carry in the yard, in the stables, in the mess hall. Words like border patrol and levy keep threading their way into the murmur. The master-at-arms begins to fold more practical drills into the daily rhythm. Instead of sparring in the open, you train in uneven ground. A slope, a ditch, patches of loose soil. Fighting on a flat practice yard teaches you balance, but war rarely gives such kindness. On the slope, your footing changes with every step. The shield tugs your arm in strange directions. Your blade swings differently when you're off balance. At first, you struggle, stumbling, sliding, missing your mark. But slowly, your body learns to adjust, to plant your foot differently, to use the slope against your opponent. One morning, you're told to march with a small group to a ruined watchtower a mile away. It hasn't been used in years, its stones mottled with moss, its wooden stair half-rotted. You're sent up to the narrow top and told to imagine it under siege. The captain points to the landscape below the fields, the dirt road, the patches of woods, and asks where you would place scouts, where you'd watch for movement, where you'd expect trouble to come from. You make your guesses, and he challenges each one. This, you realize, is as much a part of readiness as swinging a sword. Seeing danger before it arrives can be worth more than the strongest shield. Afterward, the group sets an ambush drill along the road. Half of you are travelers, the other half raiders. You crouch in the brush beside the path, waiting for the signal. The stillness is the hardest part. Every breath feels too loud, every shift of your boots too obvious. When the whistle finally comes, you burst from hiding, weapons raised. The travelers scatter laughing, but the lesson isn't lost. In real fighting, there's no laughter, and the surprise would be far uglier. Back at the castle, the rest of the day is spent on supply drills. You help load a cart with sacks of grain, crates of salted meat, barrels of water. The quartermaster explains how an army on the march measures supplies not in days, but in mouths fed per mile. He tells you of campaigns that faltered not because the enemy was stronger, but because the bread ran out. Even the youngest squires learn to guard supplies as fiercely as the gate without them. The fight ends before it begins. That night in the hall, a new story drifts over the benches. One of the guards speaks of a levy called in a distant shire, where boys of 14 marched beside their fathers. Many had never left their villages before. Some came back older in the eyes, their shoulders bowed as if under a weight no training yard could prepare them for. Others didn't return at all. You try to imagine yourself among them marching with your village banner, your spear new in your hands. It's not a picture you can hold for long. The next morning brings mounted pursuit drills. You're not chasing real enemies, but the lesson is serious. How to close distance quickly, how to cut off an opponent's path, how to ride in pairs to trap rather than scatter. You fumble your first few tries, letting your prey slip away. But with each run, you learn to angle your mount differently to read the movement ahead. It's a kind of hunt, and you begin to understand why seasoned riders speak of pursuit, with the same satisfaction hunters reserve for a clean chase. Later, the master-at-arms sets up a rotation of duties meant to mimic a long campaign day. You march in full kit for an hour, fight mock skirmishes in the yard break, only long enough to drink, then march again. By the end, your legs feel like lead. Your throat is dry, your hands ache from gripping your weapon. Yet you keep moving. The master's voice rings out. The fight won't wait for you to rest. You believe him. In the evening, the barracks is quieter than usual. Even the veterans speak in low tones. You polish your sword by the light of a single lantern, the metal gleaming with each careful stroke. Across the room, the 17-year-old squire sits hunched over, threading new laces through his shield straps. Neither of you says much. Words feel unnecessary tonight. Before bed, you're pulled aside by the captain. He tells you that in the weeks to come, there may be need for younger riders on messenger duty, fast, light, able to slip past the edges of trouble. He studies your face for a long moment before saying, "It's not the safest work. You'll ride alone maybe at night, if you're caught." He doesn't finish the sentence. You nod anyway. You've learned that readiness often means agreeing before you know all the risks. When you lie down, sleep doesn't come right away. You think about the ruined watchtower, the slope beneath your boots, the feel of the horse beneath you in pursuit. You think about the road stretching away in both directions, one path back to the safety of the castle, the other leading into whatever waits beyond the horizon. And you know that when your turn comes, no one will ask your age. They'll only ask if you can ride. The following week begins with a quiet summons to the yard at dawn. The air is still heavy with the smell of damp earth, and the sky has that pale, pearly light that comes just before sunrise. The master-at-arms is there, flanked by 2 mounted men-at-arms. He tells you in his usual clipped tone that today's lesson is escort work. You're to ride with a wagon carrying supplies to a village a few miles away through farmland and patches of woodland. On the surface, it sounds simple. But the master reminds you that escort duty can be far from safe. Bandits, opportunists, or even enemy scouts might take advantage of an unguarded road. Your job is to see the cargo delivered and return without loss. The wagon creaks forward, the oxen slow and steady, and your group rides alongside, 2 in front, 2 behind. The road is narrow, muddy from earlier rains, flanked by bare hedges. You scan the trees as you ride, looking for anything out of place, a broken branch, a flicker of movement, a patch of ground trampled flat where no one should have passed. You remember the reconnaissance lesson from the ridge and feel the same tension coil in your gut. The first mile is uneventful. Farmers nod as you pass a few calling greetings. But deeper into the woods, the air feels closer, the shadows thicker. The man in front raises a hand, slowing the wagon. He points to a section of road where the mud is churned more than the oxen could have managed. Could be nothing. Could be a sign. You circle wider through the trees to check. A broken length of rope hangs from a branch frayed at one end. The older rider studies it for a long moment before deciding it's old left from some forgotten carting job. But you file away the sight in your mind. When the village finally comes into view, you feel a small lift of relief. The wagon rolls into the muddy square, greeted by curious faces. The supplies are unloaded: sacks of grain, casks of ale, bundles of dried fish, and stowed in the small, timber-framed hall. The return journey is quieter, your eyes still scanning, but the road gives up no surprises. Back at the castle, the master only says, "You kept it whole. That's enough." Later that day, the drills turn to weapon improvisation. You're handed a stout stick, told to treat it as if it were your only weapon. You practice blocking, striking, hooking your opponent's ankle to trip him. Then you're given a length of rope, shown how to swing it with a weight at the end, how to use it to entangle an arm or pull a shield aside. It feels clumsy at first, but the master insists you may one day need to fight with whatever comes to hand. For a young soldier, losing your weapon doesn't mean the fight is over. As the sun dips, you help stack barrels in the cellar. The quartermaster lectures about siege stores again, reminding you that the first days of a siege often feel manageable, but the weeks grind harder than any battle. Hunger dulls the mind, weakens the limbs. And hunger doesn't care how old you are, he says, handing you another barrel to roll into place. That evening in the hall, the talk turns to roads. One man tells of a boy who served as a messenger between two besieged keeps, riding through forest tracks at night to carry news. He'd been no more than 15, and the route was thick with thieves. The boy was caught, once beaten, and left in a ditch, but he dragged himself up and finished the ride. Around the benches, heads nod. It's not the wound that impresses them, but the fact he kept going. The next morning brings a new lesson: river crossings. You and a handful of others are marched to the shallow ford a half-mile from the castle. The water is cold enough to sting your shins, the stones slick under your boots. The captain shows you how to keep your balance, how to use a staff for support, how to cross in pairs so the current doesn't take you. He points out that a retreat can be lost if a river crossing turns to chaos, and in that moment, everyone, young or old, is in equal danger. After the crossing, drills you practice moving equipment over water, passing shields, lifting bows high, keeping powder dry. It's clumsy, slow work, but you begin to understand how these small skills feed into the larger chain of survival. In a real retreat, you won't have time to think about the best way to carry your pack. You'll either know or you won't. By afternoon, you're back in the yard for more sparring, this time against two opponents at once. It's meant to teach you awareness to guard one side while fending off the other. You tire quickly, turning too far toward one and taking blows from the other. The master calls you over, points out where your guard dropped, then sends you back in. By the end of the session, you've improved enough to deflect at least half the strikes, but you know you still have a long way to go. That night, lying in your bunk, you think about the rope in the woods, the ford's cold current, the stick in your hands standing in for a sword. You think about the boy in the story beaten in a ditch, but still delivering his message. And it strikes you that the readiness they speak of isn't only for the clean, ordered parts of war, the set battles, the shining armor. It's for the mess, the moments when nothing goes as planned, and you have to decide quickly whether you'll keep going. And you know in your bones that's the moment they'll decide you're truly ready, whether you're 15, 25, or anything in between. The spring rains give way to clearer skies, and the air warms just enough for the mud to dry into ruts along the road. The change in weather doesn't slow the pace of training. If anything, it sharpens it. The master-at-arms begins adding longer marches into the schedule, some with no warning. You're told to assemble with full kit within minutes, then sent out beyond the castle walls with a column of squires and men-at-arms. The marches serve two purposes. First, they build endurance, not the sprinting kind, but the steady, grinding stamina needed to keep moving mile after mile. Second, they teach you how to read the country, while you walk where the land dips and rises, which stretches offer cover, which open fields would leave you exposed to arrows. The older men talk quietly as you march, pointing out how a commander might choose a ridge for defense, a stream for a barrier, a wood for concealment. You listen, storing away their words. One march takes you to an abandoned hamlet. The thatch has fallen in on most of the roofs, and the wells are half choked with debris. You're told to sweep through as if searching for hidden raiders. It's a strange, eerie task, moving from silent house to silent house, your boots crunching on old straw, your eyes flicking to every shadow. The emptiness feels heavier than any fight could. You imagine what it would be like if the silence broke with the sound of footsteps behind you. The captain uses the hamlet to teach another lesson: door entry tactics. Two fighters advance together, one shield high, the other weapon ready to strike into the room. You take your turn learning to keep low, to push through quickly, to watch the corners. Even without an enemy inside, your pulse runs high. In a real fight, there's no telling what you'll face when you cross a threshold. Later that day, you practice signaling. In battle, shouting won't carry far enough, or may be drowned out entirely. You're shown the system of horn calls, short, sharp notes for regroup, a long rising note for advance, a double blast for retreat. You learn hand signals too simple but clear, meant to be understood even in the heat of fighting. These, the captain tells you, can mean the difference between a coordinated charge and a scattered rout. In the afternoon, you're paired with a veteran for a different kind of lesson, pacing yourself in combat. The temptation for young fighters is to throw everything into the first minutes of a clash. The veteran has you spar in short bursts, rest briefly, then engage again over and over. He wants you to feel how quickly strength drains if you go too hard too soon, and how to hold some in reserve for when you truly need it. By evening, your legs ache from the march, your arms from the sparring. You slump onto the bench in the hall, glad for the weight pot of a warm meal in your hands. Around you talk hums of real campaigns of marches that lasted days of nights spent sleeping in armor under a hedgerow. One man tells of a boy who joined the army at 16 and walked across half the kingdom before seeing his first battle. By the time he did, the walking had shaped him as much as the fighting. The next day, the focus shifts to camp defense. You're shown how to set pickets, how to post guards so no stretch of the perimeter is unwatched. You help dig shallow trenches for drainage, learning how a camp can become unlivable after a few days of rain if water is left to pool. You gather brush for makeshift barriers and help set them where they'll force an attacker into narrow paths. It's not the glamorous work of A Knight's Tale, but it's the work that keeps a camp alive. In the evening, the master surprises everyone by calling for a sudden night alarm. You're shaken awake in the barracks, told the camp has been attacked. Half-dressed, fumbling for your kit, you rush to the yard to form up. The moon is bright enough to see the glint of weapons, the flicker of movement along the walls. You move where you're told, heart pounding, every sense stretched taut. After an hour, the drill ends and you're sent back to your bunk. But sleep is slow to return. The lesson is clear, danger rarely arrives when you're ready for it. The following morning, you work with the Fletcher again, this time making arrows from start to finish. You shape the shafts, cut the nocks, fix the fletching, fit the points. The smell of wood shavings and glue clings to your hands. Each arrow feels like a small promise that when you stand on a wall or in a field, you'll have something to send back toward the enemy. That night, one of the veterans sits beside you at the fire. He tells you of a siege where boys barely older than you stood the night watch on the outer palisade. Some of them had been in the army less than a week. They weren't chosen because they were ready, he says, but because they were there. That's how it is sometimes. He stares into the flames for a long moment before adding, "The trick is to stay there until the sun comes up." You think about that long after you've gone to bed. You think about the hamlet, the horn calls the night alarm. And you understand a little more why no one can give you a number for when you're old enough to fight. It isn't a number at all. It's the moment when, ready or not, you're already in the line and you stay there. The days now carry a different weight. It's not just the steady grind of drills and duties, it's the sense that everything is narrowing toward a point you can't quite see. The castle is busier than usual. Messengers come and go at all hours. The smith's forge burns late into the night, the rhythmic clang of his hammer echoing through the courtyard. In the yard, the master-at-arms has you drilling with fewer pauses, pushing harder. One morning, you're called to the great hall along with the other older squires. The captain stands before you, a map spread on the table. His finger traces a line from the castle to a small mark just beyond the border. "There's been trouble here," he says. "Raids, livestock stolen, a few farmsteads burned. We've been ordered to send a party to patrol the area." His eyes sweep over the group. "Some of you will ride. The choice isn't made in front of you. Instead, you're dismissed to the yard for mounted drills. The work is harder than usual, weaving in and out of narrow lanes marked with stakes, practicing sudden halts and sharp turns. The captain rides among you, watching, saying little. You know that every movement is being weighed, and not just for skill. He's watching for the steadiness that matters most when the road grows uncertain. By midday, you're told you'll be part of the patrol. There's no ceremony in the announcement, just your name among others. The knowledge settles over you with an odd mix of pride and unease. You've trained for this, but training is always wrapped in the safe boundaries of the castle. This will be different. The following dawn, you ride out in a column of a dozen squires, men-at-arms, and one knight leading. The road is quiet at first, the fields brushed with silver dew. But as the miles pass, the signs of trouble appear. A charred fence post, a field trampled flat, a farmyard gate hanging by one hinge. At one hamlet, the people watch from doorways, their faces wary. They tell of seeing riders at night, of hearing livestock driven off into the darkness. No one knows exactly who they were. The patrol circles outward, checking the lanes and pastures. You ride through a stretch of forest where the light falls green and dim. Here, the knight orders a halt and sends pairs along different tracks. You're sent with a man-at-arms whose quiet, watchful way puts you on edge, not because he's unfriendly, but because he misses nothing. At one point, he stops, crouches, and touches the ground. Fresh hoof prints, he murmurs. The trail leads deeper into the trees, but you're ordered back to rejoin the main group. By nightfall, the patrol returns to the castle. No fight, no chase, but you've seen the signs for yourself now. The talk in the hall is sober. The raids are real, and sooner or later the raiders will be met. You feel the tension in your shoulders even as you try to relax by the fire. The next day's drills focus on pursuit and interception. You practice riding in staggered lines, cutting off an opponent's path, forcing them toward the stronger side of your formation. You learn how to keep pace without crowding your fellows, how to signal changes without shouting. These skills are as much about trust as they are about timing trust, that the man beside you will see what you see and act in harmony. In the afternoon, you're back on foot for field skirmish drills. The yard is marked with ropes and barrels to stand in for trees, ditches, and walls. You move in small groups, trying to flush out an opposing team, hiding among them. The master watches closely, calling you back when you bunch too tightly or leave gaps between you. His voice cuts through the air. Mind your spacing. A broken line is a dead line. Evenings are quieter now, the veterans more reserved in their talk. They're sharpening blades, checking straps, oiling mail. You do the same, feeling the ritual take root in your hands. There's a calmness to it, but also an edge like smoothing the surface of a pond when you know stones are about to be thrown. One night, the 17-year-old squire sits beside you. He's been chosen for messenger duty during the next patrol. It's not the riding that worries me, he says softly. It's the space between here and there. That's where you're most alone. You nod, understanding more than you could have months ago. The following morning, you're assigned to a short-range scout ride with 2 others. The road is empty, but in the hedgerows you catch glimpses of movement, a hare darting into cover, a flock of crows lifting all at once. The lead rider points out that such things can be warning signs, that men are moving where they shouldn't be so long. You try to see as he sees, marking every ripple in the stillness. By the time you return, the master is waiting in the yard. He asks for your report, listens, and says only, "You'll do." It's a small phrase, but in this place it carries weight. It means you're not just a boy in training anymore. You're a part of the machine that will move when called. That night, lying in your bunk, you think of the hoof prints in the forest, the broken farm gate, the wary eyes in the hamlet. You think about the line between practice and reality, how it's not a sudden leap, but a narrowing gap you don't notice until you've crossed it. And you know, without anyone telling you, that you've already stepped over. The call comes just before dawn, in the thin gray light, when the world feels suspended between night and day. A runner pounds through the yard, his voice carrying patrol rides in an hour. You're already half awake, but the words send a cold ripple through you. This isn't a drill, you know it before anyone says so. The barracks stirs into urgent motion. Boots thump the floor, belts are buckled, helms snatched up from pegs. You move on, instinct now, pulling on your gear in practiced order, tunic mail, belt, sword, cloak. The weight settles onto your shoulders like a familiar hand. You grab your spear and join the others in the yard, the air smelling of damp earth and horse sweat. The patrol rides out in a long line, the sound of hooves muffled in the dew-wet grass along the road. The sun is slow to rise, spilling pale gold into the mist. Your eyes sweep the hedgerows, the edges of the woods. Every small movement catches you, a bird lifting from a branch, a fox slipping between shadows. Somewhere ahead, trouble waits. By mid-morning, you reach the same hamlet, where you saw the burned fences and wary faces. This time, the people are more urgent in their words. The raiders passed through 2 nights ago, taking livestock and grain. They moved north. The knight leading the patrol decides to press on following the trail. The tracks lead you into broken country, low ridges, and gullies, patches of scrubby woodland. The air is still heavy. The column slows, scouts fanning ahead. You're paired with another squire, your spear angled low as you scan the brush. Then a sharp whistle from the ridge, the signal. The patrol surges forward. You crest the rise and see them, a small band, 6 riders with stolen goods bundled on pack horses. They spot you in the same moment. One turns to flee, another draws a bow. The knight shouts and the world sharpens. The chase is brief but breathless. You press your mount hard, the wind tearing at your cloak, the ground flashing beneath you. Your pulse hammers in your ears. You close on one rider, his horse lathered, his eyes flicking back to you. You level your spear shout, and he veers off into the scrub, nearly unseated. A man-at-arms overtakes him, hauling him from the saddle. When it's done, the stolen animals are gathered, the raiders bound. You sit your horse chest heaving, feeling the burn in your legs, the ache in your grip. Around you, the patrol breathes the same ragged air. No one speaks for a long moment. Then the knight's voice, "Well done." The ride back is slower. The weight of the morning sits on you, not fear, not exactly pride, but a sober awareness that you've crossed into something you can't uncross. You've chased men who meant harm. You've looked them in the eyes. You've acted. Back at the castle, the prisoners are taken to the guardhouse, the stolen goods returned to their owners. The yard slowly empties. You stand for a while, your spear in hand, the damp breeze tugging at your cloak. The master-at-arms passes you, glances at you once and nods. Nothing more. But you know what it means. That night, the hall is warmer than usual, the air thick with the smell of roasting meat. The veterans speak quietly, but there's a different note in their voices when they address you now. Not as a boy, not yet as a man, but as someone who's stood where they've stood. Lying in your bunk later, you think back to the first days, the blunted swords, the clumsy shield drills, the endless marches in the rain. You think about the watchtower wind, the narrow stairs, the cold river ford. Every moment was a step on the road to this day, though you couldn't see it then. And you understand at last why no one could tell you how old you had to be to fight. Because age is not the measure. The measure is the day you go and you don't look back. The fire in the great hall has burned low, its light, a soft orange pulse against the walls. The clatter of the day has faded into the hush of night, and somewhere in the courtyard, a lone watchman's footsteps mark the slow passage of the hours. You are no longer in the saddle, no longer gripping the spear. You're here warm and still, the weight of your cloak resting gently across your shoulders. Your breathing slows. You think of the long road that brought you here, every step, from the uncertain boy in the training yard to the rider who answered the call at dawn. The mud, the rain, the aching muscles, the sharp voice of the master-at-arms, all of it now feels far away, softened by distance, like ripples fading across water. In the quiet, you remember the watchtower's view at night, the fields silvered under moonlight, the wind whispering through the arrow slits. You remember the sound of hooves in the meadow, during the mock battles, the creak of the leather straps on your shield arm, the way the forge's heat seemed to wrap around you after a cold day's ride. These memories settle in you, like embers glowing but no longer burning. Outside the walls, the world still holds its dangers. But here tonight, the gates are closed, the walls stand firm, and the night watch keeps steady pace. You are safe enough to let your grip loosen, to let your eyes grow heavy. The long road to readiness, however it's measured, can rest until morning. And as your thoughts drift, you realize that this is the truest victory of all, the quiet moment. When the fight is behind you, the hearth is warm and sleep comes like a friend.